are listening to The Common Sense Practical Prepper, sponsored by Duct Tape, the real duct tape. It fixes everything, except bad decisions. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America. From border to border, coast to coast, and all ships at sea, here is your host, Keith.
Hey everybody, this is Keith, and welcome back to the Common Sense Practical Prepper podcast for July the 9th, 2026. So tonight I want to talk about getting your wilderness first aid certification. Now, there's a couple misconceptions about what wilderness first aid is. A lot of people think that wilderness first aid is just for backpackers, long-distance hikers, somebody who goes deep in the mountains cross-country skiing, but that's not necessarily true. So let's start with the definition of wilderness first aid. Wilderness first aid is the practice of providing emergency medical care in remote environments where professional help is not readily available, typically more than 1 hour from definitive medical care. So it comes down to that 1 hour. So here's the part that most people don't realize. You do not have to be 15 miles up a trail for this to apply to you. If a major winter storm hits your area, hits your neighborhood, knocks out power, drops trees across the roads, and emergency services is not able to get to you, let's say 2 or 3 days because of the amount of devastation, the amount of trees are down, roads are washed out, what have you, by definition, you are now in a wilderness medicine situation. You are the highest level of medical care available to your family and neighbors. Well, unless maybe you have a doctor or a nurse that's a family member or a neighbor, and then they have the highest level of medical care. So again, the basic difference between regular first aid and wilderness first aid comes down to one thing, and that is time. In a normal first aid situation, if something bad happens, you call 911, you stabilize the patient, and EMS arrives within 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer depending on where you live. So that's what we call the golden hour. In a wilderness, a remote setting, that help may not arrive for many hours or even days. When you're hours away from a hospital, you're not trying just to stabilize somebody until the ambulance gets there. You become responsible for their care for an extended period of time. So here's a couple examples. If someone cuts their hand in the kitchen, you clean it, bandage it, and maybe drive them to urgent care. In the wilderness, that cut can become a serious infection very quickly if it's not managed properly for multiple days. If someone twists an ankle on the sidewalk outside your house, they might hobble to a bench and wait for a ride to take them home or take them to the hospital. If they twist that same ankle 5 miles into a hiking trip, you now have to decide and figure out how to stabilize it well enough for them to walk out. So these are the kinds of situations where wilderness first aid training becomes extremely valuable. So me personally, basic first aid, child and adult CPR, AED, and stop the bleed. So that's the extent of my medical training. So what exactly do you learn in wilderness first aid, and how does it differ from a regular first aid class? You learn extended patient assessment, how to monitor a patient for hours or even days. You learn improvised care, how to splint a broken bone using a hiking pole and duct tape, sticks, whatever you have. You get much better training on environmental emergencies, heat stroke, hypothermia, even altitude sickness. And most importantly, you learn evacuation decision-making, which is paramount in a remote situation. How to decide whether someone can walk out or they need to be carried, need to call in a helicopter, or whatever it happens to be. Or maybe it's a situation where it's safer just to stay put until EMS arrive. So who should take a wilderness first aid class? If you spend any time outdoors, hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, this type of training is extremely valuable. It's not just for outdoor enthusiasts. It's for everybody. If you live in an area that regularly gets hit by severe weather, it's something you should consider. The good news is that there are all types of training facilities all over the place, different companies that offer this. So here in the U.S., the two most respected providers are Knowles, N-O-L-S, so Knowles Wilderness Medicine, and Solo, just like it sounds, S-O-L-O, Wilderness Medicine. For folks international, try searching Wilderness First Aid, Remote First Aid, Outdoor First Aid, or maybe Wilderness Medical Course, depending on where you are. And between those 4 or 5 search terms, I think you're going to get what you need. Now, they are not very difficult classes. Normally, Wilderness First Aid, there's a lot of hands-on, there's a lot of practicals, and normally it's a 2-day class, 12 to 14 hours, and it really just depends on where you go. Now, Knowles and Solo are, they're more rigorous than the Red Cross version. So the Red Cross Wilderness First Aid class, I don't want to say it's not as good as the others, but the other two, Knowles and Solo, tend to be more rigorous with their agenda and their training, so that might be a little more difficult than the Red Cross Wilderness First Aid class. And if you're just thinking about it, there are tons of books out there, tons of stuff to read if you just want to read up on wilderness medicine or wilderness first aid certification to see what it's all about. A couple different books. Wilderness and Rescue Medicine by Dr. Jeff Isaac. The Prepper's Medical Handbook, which I have, by Dr. William Forgy. Read those, get plenty of background, decide if it's something that you need to do. Again, I always want to be constantly learning. I think it keeps my mind sharp. It keeps my body sharp. So I'm always thirsty for information. And there's a couple of classes. There's one from Knowles that's only an hour and a half away from me in Charlottesville, Virginia, but it happens to conflict with Prepper Camp. Nice segue. I'll be speaking at Prepper Camp this year, August 14th, 15th, and 16th down in North Carolina. I'll be teaching Run, Hide, Fight. But I would have gone to that class in Charlottesville if those dates had not conflicted with Prepper Camp. And there are some classes in September and November up near Washington, D.C., I think in Fairfax or Loudoun County. So there's plenty of options. All right, folks, I really appreciate everybody stopping by. If you found this episode useful, please do me a favor. Share, like, subscribe, or leave a review. Leaving a review is the best way for the podcast to get traction. In fact, I checked yesterday, and in the how-to category, this podcast is ranked 42nd in the United States, which I think is the highest ranking we've achieved. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate that, folks. And as always, please be careful out there. Take care of one another. And until next time.
You've been listening to The Common Sense Practical Prepper. Subscribe, like, drop a review. Over and out.